So before we get too far into it, I want to thank the sponsor of all of this video series, and that is Surge Supply. Surge Supply does all of our custom cabinetry, all of the floors, all of the walls, everything that we have put inside the van has been supplied from Surge Supply. Their link is in the description, as well as Bluetti. Bluetti is the components that I'm using to power our van, and that's what we're going to talk about next, is how can you power your van with a simple power station and cut out the extreme cost of building your own self-contained power system. I've seen a lot of van builds, and I have done thousands of hours of YouTube research on what I should do or what I could do to provide my van with enough power to run the components that I need to run. Now, everybody's requirements are a bit different. For us, I can run 95% of our van on DC power. Now, if you need AC power or you feel you need AC power, that is a different story. And the Bluetti system allows for AC power to be ran, but it's not as clean. You'd have to kind of run extension cords and plug stuff in, and that's kind of a pain. But for everything else that you do, your refrigerator can be DC or AC. Your max air fans, DC or AC. Your air conditioner, your heater, all DC. Your lights, all DC. You can charge all of your devices off DC. The only thing I'm unable to charge off of my DC power is my laptop, because it has a simple AC power plug for a MacBook that you plug into the wall. So I have one AC outlet inside my van. Everything else is DC. And that's simply because DC converts better because you're not running it through an inverter. You don't need an inverter if you're running everything DC. I would recommend you have an inverter in the event that you want to have any AC power, but that's what the Bluetti system is, and that's what it can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly what we have, how we've been able to live off-grid in this thing with absolutely no issues whatsoever, go over our solar power setup, talk through how I envision this, more importantly, how much we spent versus people who have the same amount of power that have spent 3 times as much. So where my build differs from possibly your build and a lot of people that buy a Sprinter directly from the factory is underneath the passenger seat, I have a secondary battery that is being charged off of the alternator, and all of that came factory when I purchased the van. I opted in for an additional battery because I had an idea of exactly what I wanted to do and how I wanted to make this entire system work for us. Now, with that backup battery, I have all of my auxiliary components, my lights, everything that is on the exterior of the vehicle. So my off-road lights are all tied into that. My remote switch is all tied into that. A lot of things run off of that battery because that is constantly being replenished by the alternator. Once my main battery hits enough volts, it starts sending power directly to my secondary battery. So it gives me the option to use that secondary battery as kind of like a power/charging source. Off of that, it runs all the way back. I have a 4-gauge wire that runs from my auxiliary battery back to the wheel well box where I have a Renogy 1000 watt inverter. Now that inverter can be turned on and off by a switch that is located just above my galley. I can turn that inverter on, and what I've done from there is run a power outlet from the inverter up to where my galley is. Now that gives me the ability to turn on my inverter, and I have access to AC power directly through that additional outlet that I installed in the wall in the van. Now, it may sound complicated, but it's truly not. I did put a 100 amp inline fuse between the battery and the inverter, and that is right next to the battery up here underneath the passenger seat. Now, for that inverter, it pulls 1000 watts. Now, my components that I'm using for my DC power, I have a Bluetti AC200 Max. It's 2048 watt hours, which converts roughly to 1.57 amp hours. So a lot of times you will hear people speak about how big their battery bank system is, and it's always talked about in amp hours. Well, what does amp hours actually mean? You have to do the conversion from amp hours to get your watt hours, because if you have 5 components that pull roughly 200 watts at a time when all of them are turned on, and you run all of those components at the same time, you simply divide the 200 by your 2048, and that gives you how many rough hours you're going to be able to run your system with absolutely nothing coming into the battery bank. So in addition to that 2048 watt hour AC200 Max, I also have an additional 3048 watt hour standalone accessory battery, and I believe that is the B300. So there's a B230, which is 2,048 watt hours, and there's the B300, which is 3,042 or 48 watt hours. That is in addition to my 2,048 watt hour AC200 Max. If I got those numbers confused a little bit, I apologize. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. Now, I have those connected together, and that provides me with roughly 500 amp hours in a much smaller form factor. In the AC200 Max, it comes with a 2,000 watt inverter as well as 5 AC ports. So that gives me the ability to run additional AC power should I need it, which I don't, but if I did, I could run it off of the AC200 Max. Now, you connect those with a specific proprietary connection cable that comes from Bluetti, and when you buy this bundle together, you will receive all of the components you need and the charging system in the box. So you get everything. And that has made it so much easier for us because I did not need an inverter. I did not need a solar charge controller. I did not need a DC to DC power controller. I did not need any of that. Now, there are some limitations, and I think it's fair to say that this system definitely has limitations that a standalone system with a DC to DC charger would not have, because you can DC to DC charge off of your alternator directly to your standalone battery system if you were to build it on your own, which is constantly pushing power into it. So all the time that you're driving, it is pushing power into it. And that's kind of the idea behind having the secondary battery being charged off the alternator, which runs to an inverter, because that has a 1,000 watt inverter. That Renogy 1,000 watt inverter pushes enough watts to charge my AC200 Max or my B300 off of that inverter, off of the secondary battery. So I was able to eliminate a whole piece of a charging system by just having that inverter, because it's 1,000 watts, and the components, the AC200 Max as well as the B300, they only charge at roughly 500 watts. So I don't have to worry about that being too much for my inverter to handle. I just have to have the time to allow it to charge. Now, that inverter charging those two big battery banks, it would kill this lead acid battery in about half the amount of time. So I'm only going to get roughly a half of a charge on my AC200 Max, and even less, about 30% on my B300, by coming off of this secondary battery. But the reason I have that installed is simply because it's a source of emergency power. If I need it for whatever reason and I have no sunlight, I have no shore power, I have no options of charging my system, I can plug it into that inverter and I can charge the AC200 Max up to about halfway. Now, on top of our van, we have 3 Renogy 175 watt solar panels mounted flush to our Orion Van Gear roof rack. I will do a video on the Orion Van Gear roof rack, but I will also put the link in the description if you're looking for a low pro, awesome roof rack for your Sprinter that is all aluminum, lightweight, and has a bunch of different uses. I will put that link in the description and you can check that out. But we have 3 175 watt solar panels. Now, that is 375, 450, 525, roughly somewhere in there. But you're not going to get full wattage or full power out of a solar panel. So we went with 3. We covered up pretty much the entire roof. And there's always a loss value there. So depending upon how far your run is, how far your solar panels are from the component you're charging, and what quality solar panel you're using, you may only get 60 to 80%. I'm roughly around 78 to 82% on any given bright sunny day. I'm getting 80% roughly of the full total watts of each solar panel. So that all helps try to keep the system charged. Now, I can very easily charge my AC200 Max or my B300 directly off of solar panels. So I can flip the plug around and I can plug in the B300, or I can plug in the AC200 Max. I can do a lot of different things with an XT90 connector. That XT90 connector plugs directly into both of those units through an adapter sold by Bluetti. Now I can have my AC200 Max charging off my inverter and my solar panels charging my B300, or I could have that reversed, or I could also have shore power going into the B300 or the AC200 Max, and then have solar going into the other one. So I have a lot of different options of maintaining charge, and it really comes down to what you think you're going to need for your build. I just caution everybody to be very careful before you get into something that is extremely robust and spend a fortune on batteries. You need to realize what you're going to use. And when I started this build, all I had was the AC200 Max. We went on a 2-week trip. We went down to Florida. We camped the entire way there, camped the entire way back, and camped a lot while we were down there, minus Disney World and my father-in-law's house. Now, that gave me a really good idea of what we need for this month-long trip that we leave on in 3 days. We will be out west for a full month, visiting a bunch of companies and talking to a bunch of people about what we can do to make this Sprinter build better and bigger, and I'm really excited about that, but I don't want to share too much about that yet. So that was a good proving ground for me to decide what I want. So now I knew when I got back, well, if it's hot out, because it was in Florida, it was only 80 degrees, but that was much hotter than the conditions we were in the Smoky Mountain National Park. So when we got down to Florida, we started burning through our batteries a lot quicker. So I knew I needed to up my capacity, and that's why I got the B300 from Bluetti. Now, full disclosure, the links for these products will be in the description, but Bluetti did give me a very significant discount in return for this video. But what you have to think about, and for me, what I want you to understand, I would not be using this Bluetti setup if it was not proficient enough for me to keep my family warm, keep my family cool, and keep everything in my van running all the time. So we've talked about how we store the power. We've talked about how we get the power. We've talked about the auxiliary battery, the Renogy 1000 watt inverter that we have as a emergency power source. We talked about all that. Well, how do we now get the power out of those 2 battery banks and distribute that throughout the van? And that is much easier than you're probably expecting, but it does take a little bit of MacGyver work. So there are cables that come with your AC200 Max, and those cables plug directly into the front and the side of your AC200 Max. Well, on the front of your battery bank, you have a power out. It's a 30 amp output that you can plug this marine connector into. It's an aviation plug is what it's called. You plug it directly into that, you screw it on, and that comes off and is connected to a XT90. And that pulls 30 amps of power out of your main system, your AC200 Max. Everything is contained within that AC200 Max. All the B300 does is connects to the AC200 Max, which allows you to pull power from the B300 and push it out via the AC200 Max. I'm sorry if that was a bit hard to follow, but it's really not that complicated. Once you have your 30 amp aviation plug plugged in, it comes connected with an XT90 or an XT60. It's the end adapter that it comes connected with. All I did is cut that, pulled those wires apart, stripped them down. There's simply a positive and a negative. I took a Blue Sea Components 12 outputs. I don't know the best way to say that. It is a 12-gang switch box, essentially. So it is my power module. It is the control panel. It's everything. All the power runs into my Blue Sea Components fuse box and then is distributed throughout the van. I took the power and the ground, connected them to the Blue Sea Components fuse box, and then I put my wire in, the appropriate gauge wire for the run and the piece of equipment I was trying to run. If you guys are unfamiliar with exactly what wire size you should use, I will look for a graph and try to put a link to it down in the description that shows you what wire size you need versus how long your run is going to be. You don't need to be absolutely perfect, but you don't want to be wrong either, simply because you don't want to send too much power or not enough power, because you will have flickering issues with your lights, or you may not get enough power that you need for your heater to produce heat inside your van, or your AC, whichever one you have. Now, everything is ran off of that one fuse box, and each individual component, my lights, my refrigerator, my heater, my fans, all of that is then fused and then pushed out, and the power goes throughout my entire system. So that in itself is such an easy way for you to get power in, 30 amps of power going to your Blue Seas fuse box. From your Blue Seas fuse box, you take that out to all of your components. You power and you ground them, or you go to your switch and then you power off your switch to your lights. I have a dimmer, so there's a lot of things that I did that may be a little bit different than you, but the simplest way for me to describe this is my battery bank, it's standalone. It then powers my Blue Sea Components fuse box. That Blue Sea Components fuse box then powers all of my components. And all of those are fused prior to pushing the power to the component. So if something happens and a jolt of power comes out of my power system, it hits my fuse box. If it's more than the amp allowance inside the fuse, it blows that fuse and stops the power from going further. I know this has kind of been a technical video and it wasn't intended to be that, but sometimes you have to be as technical as you can so people can get the best idea. But the last part of this, I want to talk about the difference in price and how much you can power your van for without having to break the bank on your van build. So right now on Bluetti's website, you can get the AC200 Max plus the B300, all of your cables, your charging system, everything that you need to get this thing up and running for $3,998. So $4,000 gets you nearly 500 amp hours of battery life. But the best part about this system for us is this is completely mobile. If I want to take my AC200 Max out of here and put it in my Power Wagon and go on a month-long trip, I can do that. If I need to take this stuff inside because the power goes out and I need to continue to run components, I can do that. The AC200 Max actually has a 2,200 watt inverter. I was just looking at the specs and I want to make sure I make that clear. It's not just 2,000. You can run a lot of power through this machine, and it gives you complete control. You can take it out, you can replace it, you can upgrade it, you can downsize it. If you're just going on a week trip and it's just me, I may only take the AC200 Max because I know I'm not going to need as much power as if my wife, my daughter, my son, and everybody's with me. So it gives you the ability to be mobile. Once you build a 500 amp hour system, let's use Victron, for example, or even Renogy, you're going to be talking $10,000, $12,000, and $15,000 for the same thing that you can get. Now, is it as good? Does it do the same job? I think that's a matter of opinion. In my situation, in my particular situation, this is way better and it's far less expensive. The reason it's better is because it's mobile. I can use it for whatever I need to use it for whenever I need to use it. And that makes this the most reasonable option. Being able to take it out of my van, put it in my house, put it in my Power Wagon, put it in the Subaru, do whatever I need to do with it, it makes this a no-brainer because you spend $15,000 on a standalone system for your van, it's in your van and it's going nowhere. You're not picking it up and taking it out and charging it inside to run your refrigerator. You could run extension cords from your van into your house in the event that something happens, but you can't take your system with you to another vehicle. Or if I sell this van, which I'm thinking about doing, if I sell this van, I can take that out if somebody wants to do something different and I can keep it. There's just so many different options. It's so much more versatile than just having a standalone system, and it is so much less expensive. Is it better? Probably not. Does it work very well? Am I 100% thrilled that I went this way? Yes. Not only did I save $10,000 in doing so, I can also do anything I want with it whenever I want. So that's what I got. I hope all of this was helpful. I would love if you guys click that subscribe button to come along for all of our adventures. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I would love to answer your questions. I answer questions every single morning. It's one of the first things I do. I try to get to everybody. And I would love to know what your thoughts on something like this are, because quite honestly, I haven't found anything better. There are other companies that do something similar, but it is not the same as what we have going on, and Bluetti has constantly been innovating. So Bluetti, thank you for sponsoring this video. Thank you for providing me a discount for these products. All of the links are in the description if you choose to go this route. If you don't want to buy through these links, that's fine. They don't cost you anything more, but it does help the channel grow, and obviously that's what we're attempting to do. So until next time, I will see you guys on the next one.